Echoes Beneath the Fog, The London Strange Files, Kailan Pitre. Author's note. This work was not written from imagination alone. It came from a feeling I have carried for years, a quiet recognition of places I have never physically known, yet somehow remember. Europe has always felt familiar to me, not in a way I can explain, but in a way my body understands. The streets, the stone, the silence, the weight of history. It all feels like something I have touched before. This anthology is a reflection of that feeling, a translation of memory into story, a bridge between what is known and what is remembered. These pages are not just fiction, they are echoes, dedication, to the lands that call without speaking, to the places my spirit remembers before my mind can understand, to my ancestors, known and unknown, whose footsteps may still live within me, and to the feeling of home that exists beyond distance, beyond time, beyond explanation. The London Strange Files. There are cities that grow quickly and forget the ground beneath them, and there are cities that remember. London is not a place that forgets. It has stood through fires, wars, storms, and centuries of footsteps. Beneath its streets lie the bones of older cities, Roman roads, medieval tunnels, forgotten halls sealed by time and stone. Each generation builds upon the last, stacking history like layers of sediment. Most people never think about this. They walk past old brick walls and iron lampposts without wondering how many lives have passed through those same streets before them. But occasionally the past does something strange. It refuses to stay where it belongs. Some people notice these moments. Most dismiss them as tricks of the mind, shadows in fog, echoes in old buildings, stories invented by imagination. Yet, every so often, someone walks into a quiet bookshop carrying a photograph, or a letter, or a story that cannot easily be explained. And that is where this record begins. My name is Dr. Elias Ward. Officially, I am a historical consultant specializing in medieval architecture and archival research throughout the United Kingdom. Unofficially, I have spent much of my life documenting events that history itself cannot quite account for. I do not chase ghosts. I do not search for monsters. I study places, old restaurants that appear during storms, doors hidden inside castle walls, figures seen moving inside clock towers that have been sealed for decades. These things happen rarely, but they happen often enough that someone must record them. For years, I believed these incidents were unrelated, isolated disturbances tied to the age of the city. Then Clara Finch arrived at the bookshop one autumn evening, carrying a notebook and a question that would change everything. She had come searching for a forgotten manuscript. Instead, she found my archive. And together we began uncovering something far older than either of us had expected. Something buried beneath the streets of London. Something that the city itself has been trying to contain for centuries. These pages contain the record of those investigations. They are not explanations, only observations. Because after years of studying the strange events scattered across this city, I have come to understand one simple truth. London is not haunted. It is remembering. Case File 01, the restaurant that appears in rain. The rain began just after dusk, not a sudden storm, but a slow, steady fall that settled over the streets of London like a memory returning. The kind of rain that softened the edges of buildings and blurred the glow of street lamps into long streaks of gold across wet pavement. From the upstairs window of the bookshop, Clara Finch watched the city disappear into it. The rooftops faded first, then the distant buildings, until only the nearest street remained visible, quiet, narrow, and glistening beneath the rain. She had been in the shop for nearly 3 weeks now, and already she had learned that something about this place was different. Not wrong, just layered, as if the air itself carried more than it should. Behind her, Dr. Elias Ward sat at his desk, surrounded by papers and old maps. the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the careful lines of his handwriting. He did not look up. He rarely did unless something demanded his attention. Clara turned from the window. "Does it always rain like this?" Elias paused just slightly. "No," he said. "Only when it wants to be noticed." Clara frowned faintly, unsure whether he was serious. Before she could respond, the bell downstairs rang. Both of them went still. The shop was closed. Elias set his pen down. "Would you mind seeing who that is?" he asked. Clara nodded and made her way downstairs, her footsteps quiet against the wooden floor. The shop below was dimly lit, rows of old books casting long shadows across the narrow space. The smell of aged paper and wood lingered in the air. A man stood just inside the doorway, rain dripping from his coat onto the floor beneath him. He looked unsettled. Not frightened exactly, but as if something had followed him there, something he couldn't quite explain. "I'm sorry," Clara said gently. "We're closed." "I know," the man interrupted quickly. I didn't know where else to go." Clara studied him for a moment. There was something in his expression she recognized. Not panic, not confusion. Recognition. The same kind of feeling she had when she first stepped into this shop. "Come in," she said. He hesitated only briefly before stepping further inside. By the time Elias reached the bottom of the stairs, the man had removed his coat, though his hands still trembled slightly. Elias observed him quietly. "Tell me," he said, "what you saw." The man let out a breath. It wasn't supposed to be there. Elias gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Where?" "A street off the main road. I walk it every night on my way home. There's nothing there. Just a wall, brick, always has been." Clara leaned slightly forward. "And tonight?" The man swallowed. "Tonight? There was a restaurant." Silence settled over the room. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Elias gestured toward a chair. "Start from the beginning." The man sat. "It only appears when it rains like this," he said, heavy enough to blur everything. "I almost walked past it, but the light caught my attention. Warm light, yellow, like candlelight." Clara could almost see it as he spoke. A glow in the rain, something out of place but inviting. "I thought it was new," he continued, "someplace I'd just never noticed before. So I went inside." Elias's expression did not change. "And?" The man looked down at his hands. "It was normal. That's the strange part. Tables, people, soft music, the kind of place you don't question, like it had always been there." "What about the staff?" Clara asked. "They were dressed differently," he said slowly. "Not modern, not exactly old either. Just out of time." Elias glanced briefly toward Clara, then back to the man. "Did you eat there?" The man nodded. "Yes." "And afterward?" The man hesitated. This time there was something closer to fear in his expression. "I had a dream." Clara felt a quiet shift in the room. "What kind of dream?" she asked. The man looked up. "A castle." The word lingered. "Stone walls," he continued. "A long table, dozens of people sitting together, eating, laughing, like some kind of feast." His voice lowered. "And I was there." Elias leaned forward slightly. "Not watching?" The man shook his head. "No, sitting with them." Clara felt a chill move through her. "And when you went back the next day?" Elias asked. The man gave a hollow laugh. "There was nothing there." Silence again. Just the soft, steady sound of rain against the windows. Elias stood. "Clara," he said, "bring your coat." She didn't hesitate. They stepped out into the rain a few minutes later. The street outside the bookshop shone black beneath the lamplight, every stone reflecting gold and shadow. Clara pulled her coat tighter around herself as she followed Elias and the man into the wet evening. The city felt quieter than usual, as if the weather had pressed everything inward. "What is your name?" Elias asked as they walked. Daniel Harrow. And you said you've seen it before? Daniel nodded. Twice, but I only went in tonight. Elias said nothing for a moment. Clara had already learned that his silences were never empty. He seemed to place every new fact somewhere invisible, arranging them into patterns no one else could yet see. They turned down a narrower street where the buildings stood closer together, their upper windows dark. An iron sign creaked faintly in the wind above a shuttered antique shop. Somewhere farther off, a cab moved through the rain with a low hiss. Daniel slowed. It's here. Clara looked ahead. Between a tailor's shop and an old tobacconist was exactly what Daniel had described. A brick wall, dark with rain, unbroken, still. For a moment none of them spoke. Daniel stared at it as though the sight offended him. I'm telling you, he said. It was there. I believe you, Elias replied. Daniel looked at him sharply, as if he had expected skepticism and did not know what to do without it. Elias stepped closer to the wall. He ran his gloved hand lightly across the wet brick, studying the mortar lines, the age of the stone, the narrow space between the adjoining buildings. Clara moved beside him. You believe him that easily? I did not say the restaurant was there, Elias said, only that he believes it was. That sounds like the same thing. It rarely is. Daniel exhaled, frustrated. I know what I saw. Elias turned to him at last, and I suspect you did. That quieted him. Rainwater slipped from the edge of Clara's sleeve as she looked from the wall to the dark windows above. There was nothing remarkable about the place at all, and yet she felt the oddest resistance standing near it, as if the air itself held the outline of something missing. Tell me exactly what you dreamt, Elias said. Daniel rubbed rain from his brow. I told you, a castle, a feast. Everything you remember. Daniel shut his eyes briefly, gathering it. There were torches on the walls. I could hear music, but I couldn't see who was playing it. The table was set with silver and dark cups. People were talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I remember feeling... He faltered. What? Clara asked. He opened his eyes again, like I had been there before. The rain deepened around them. Clara glanced at Elias. His expression had sharpened in that slight way that meant something important had just entered the room, even if the room was only a street in the storm. Did you recognize the castle? Elias asked. No. But it felt familiar. Yes. Elias nodded once, then stepped back from the wall. Go home, Mr. Harrow. If the dream returns, write down everything you see before speaking to anyone. Daniel hesitated. That's all? For tonight? Daniel seemed to want more, but at last he gave a tense nod and disappeared back into the rain. Clara waited until he was gone. You think it's real? Elias kept his eyes on the wall. I think something happened to him. That is not an answer. No, he said. It is the beginning of one. They returned to the bookshop, soaked at the hems and silent. Once inside, Clara lit the second lamp in the upstairs office, while Elias pulled a city ledger from one shelf and several older survey volumes from another. Soon the desk was crowded with maps, property records, and a stack of worn municipal indexes bound in fading red cloth. Clara watched him work for several minutes before joining him. What am I looking for? The history of that address. She opened one of the ledgers and began tracing old entries with her finger. The pages smelled of dust and dry glue. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the glass. For a long while, there was only the turning of pages. Then Clara stopped. Elias. He looked up. There was a building there. What sort? She scanned the entry again. Commercial ground floor, lodging above, recorded in 1824, later amended in 1841. Her eyes moved lower. It says dining rooms attached. A restaurant, Elias said. Of a kind. He crossed to her side of the desk and bent over the page. His shoulder brushed hers briefly as he read. Clara felt, not for the first time, that strange mixture of precision and oldness around him. as if he belonged more naturally among records than among living people. "There's more," she said, turning another page. "Fire damage. Severe. Structure lost." "Date?" She found it and frowned. "November 14th, 1843. Elias went still. "What?" "Rain," he said. Clara stared at him. He reached for another volume, this one much thinner, and flipped through it with practiced speed. Newspaper records, notices, public accounts. At last, he set a finger on a narrow column. "Here!" She leaned in. The article was short. A late evening fire had destroyed a dining house on the street Daniel had named. Several patrons and staff were believed trapped inside before the flames overtook the building. Poor weather had delayed rescue efforts. Witnesses described smoke, confusion, broken windows, and a gathering crowd in the rain. Clara read it twice. It was the last night it was ever open. Yes. And Daniel dreamed of a feast. Elias closed the paper carefully. A final meal. The words hung between them. Clara looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Do you think the restaurant is repeating?" "Perhaps." Because of the fire? Perhaps because some moments do not end cleanly. He moved back to the desk and unfolded a larger map. Places hold more than stone. Heat, grief, routine, expectation. Sometimes, under the right conditions, they release what they have kept. Clara watched him mark the street with a pencil. "You say things like that as though they are ordinary. I assure you, Miss Finch, I have never considered them ordinary." She smiled despite herself. "Then why do you sound so calm?" "Because panic has yet to improve research." That earned a small laugh from her, and for a moment the room felt warm again. Then she noticed something tucked into the back of the property ledger, a folded scrap, older than the rest. "What's this?" She drew it out carefully. It was a copy of a much earlier reference, likely transcribed from a private estate book. The handwriting was cramped but legible. Elias took it from her and read silently. "What does it say?" His eyes lifted, unreadable. "It mentions guests dining there while travelling from a northern estate." He looked back at the paper. "And one line of interest." "Which is?" He handed it to her. Clara read aloud, softly. "Those who lodged before the hill fort feast remarked that the hall below the castle seemed prepared for more than the living." She lowered the page. "The castle?" "Yes." A quiet moved through her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. The man's dream, the restaurant, the fire, the old line in old ink. All of it seemed to lean towards something larger than coincidence. "What do we do now?" she asked. Elias looked toward the blackened window where rain still silvered the glass. "We wait." "For what?" He met her eyes. "For the city to remember again." Near midnight, the rain had not lessened. Clara had begun to think they would simply spend the rest of the evening with maps and ledgers when Elias rose, took his coat from the stand, and reached for the shop keys. "It's time." She was on her feet at once. "How do you know?" He glanced toward the window. "Some storms linger, others settle." "That is not an explanation." "No," he said, opening the office door. "But it is often enough." The street was emptier now, the city reduced to rain, stone, and light. Their footsteps echoed as they returned to the narrow road where the brick wall stood between the two old businesses. At first, Clara thought nothing had changed. Then she saw it. Not the restaurant itself. Not yet. Only the light. A faint amber glow where the walls should have been, blurred behind the rain like a memory struggling toward form. She stopped walking. Elias did not. "Come along," he said quietly. With each step, the shape sharpened. Brick softened into glass. Darkness warmed into candlelight. A painted sign emerged above a narrow doorway, its lettering too blurred by weather and age to read fully. Through the windows, Clara could see small tables, white cloth, polished wood, the shine of silver, and figures moving slowly inside as if nothing about their existence were impossible. Her breath caught. It's real. Beside her, Elias's expression remained composed, but his eyes had gone intent and distant. Real enough. A waiter passed the front window carrying a tray. His coat was cut in an older style, elegant but difficult to place. At a table near the back, a woman turned her head, laughing at something said by a man Clara could not quite see. Warmth spilled from the windows into the rain. The door stood half open. For one impossible, disorienting second, Clara felt not terror but longing. The restaurant looked safe, inviting, familiar in a way she could not explain. She understood then how Daniel had walked in. How can they not know? She whispered. They do not know what follows, Elias said. The words tightened the air around them. Clara looked at him. Should we go inside? He did not answer at once. Instead, he watched the room beyond the glass with a stillness that made her think he was listening for something beneath the rain. Finally, he said, No. Why? Because this is not our moment. A burst of laughter rose from within the restaurant. Somewhere inside, a glass was lifted in a toast. A musician began to play something soft and bright, barely audible through the weather. Clara felt suddenly as though she stood at the edge of a cliff made of time. One more step, and she might fall centuries. Then lightning flashed over the city. For a single white instant, the entire street was laid bare. The restaurant vanished. The light died. The music stopped. Before them stood only the old brick wall, slick with rain and unbroken from side to side. Clara did not realize she had grabbed Elias's sleeve until he looked down at her hand. Slowly, she let go. Neither of them spoke on the walk back. Inside the bookshop, Elias removed his coat and set it over a chair to dry. Clara remained by the window, staring out into the rain-dark street, as though the city might reveal something else if she waited long enough. At last she turned. They were alive. Yes, but not now. No. She tried to put words around what she had seen and failed. It didn't feel like a ghost. Elias lit a lamp and the office brightened in soft gold. It was not a ghost, he said. Not in the usual sense. Then what was it? He considered. A preserved moment, perhaps. A pressure point? A room the city has not entirely released. Clara looked down at the ledger still lying open on the desk. The last dinner before the fire. Likely. She moved closer, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. Do you think they ever appear for a reason? Or do they just happen? Elias sat as well, folding his hands over the worn leather cover of an empty case journal. I have never believed such things are random, he said. But reason does not always mean intention. A city is like any old body. It carries scars. Sometimes, in weather like this, the old wounds ache. He opened the journal. On the first page, he wrote in his careful, narrow hand, Case File 01, the restaurant that appears in rain. Then he passed the journal across to Clara. Write down everything you remember. She looked at him. You want me to do it? I want the record to be precise. Clara took the pen. For a moment she hesitated over the page, hearing again the laughter through the glass, seeing the warm room in the storm, feeling that impossible sadness that arrived only after it was gone. Then she began. Later, much later, after Elias had gone below to lock the shop and the rain had softened to a hush, Clara remained alone in the office finishing the entry. When she finally set the pen down, her eyes drifted to the black window. Her own reflection stared faintly back at her. Behind it, the city was hidden by mist. She thought of the people in the restaurant, gathered around candlelight, unaware that the night would not end as they expected. She thought of Daniel dreaming himself among them. She thought of the strange and terrible tenderness of seeing a place survive only by repeating the final hour before its destruction. On a loose slip of paper, almost without thinking, She wrote a line for the archive. Some places remember the night they were lost. She left it beside the journal, extinguished the lamp, and listened for a moment to the building settling into silence around her. Below, the bookshop slept among its maps and shadows. Beyond it, London kept its own counsel. And somewhere beneath the rain and stone, something old had shifted, slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if aware that it had been noticed. Case File 02, The Tunnel That Should Not Exist. The following morning, the rain had stopped. London did not wake all at once. It unfolded slowly, light pushing through cloud, streets drying in uneven patches, the quiet return of footsteps and passing voices. The world looked ordinary again. That, Clara had already learned, meant very little. She arrived downstairs early, expecting to find Elias already at work. Instead, she found the shop door slightly ajar. That alone was unusual. Elias was precise about such things. She stepped inside carefully. Dr. Ward? No answer. The shop felt different. Not disturbed, not in any obvious way, but altered, as though something had passed through it and left no trace except a subtle shift in the air. Clara moved toward the back where the narrow staircase led up to the office. Halfway there, she stopped. There was someone else in the shop. A man stood near the counter, turning slowly in place, as if unsure whether he should remain or leave. He wore a dark jacket marked with dust and faint grease stains. His hands were rough, his posture tense. When he noticed Clara, relief crossed his face almost immediately. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't want to just walk out." The door was open. Clara glanced once toward the staircase, then back to him. "It's all right. Can I help you?" He hesitated, studying her as though weighing how much to say. "I was told to come here," he said. "Someone said this is where you bring things that don't make sense." Clara felt something quiet settle into place. "You were told correctly," she said. "What happened?" The man exhaled. "It's easier if I just show you." Elias returned a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of tea and looking only mildly surprised to find Clara and the man waiting for him upstairs. "You've brought a guest," he said. "He brought something," Clara replied. The man set a photograph on the desk. Elias placed the tea down without looking at it. "Name?" he asked. "Mark Ellison." "And your profession?" "Tunnel maintenance. Underground work." Elias's eyes flickered, just briefly, before he picked up the photograph. That was the moment his attention sharpened. Clara leaned closer. The image showed a section of tunnel, brick-lined, dimly lit by what appeared to be a work lamp placed just out of frame. The walls were older than most of the underground passages Clara had seen in photographs. The bricks were darker, irregular, and the mortar uneven in a way that suggested age beyond the railway system. At the centre of the image was an opening, not a break. A passage, a narrow corridor leading off into shadow. Clara frowned. "Is this part of the underground?" Mark shook his head. "That's the problem. It shouldn't be there." Elias set the photograph down carefully. "Explain." Mark ran a hand through his hair, leaving a faint streak of dust behind. "We were doing routine checks. Old section, mostly sealed off. Nothing unusual." He paused. Then one of the guys noticed a draft coming from the wall. "A draft," Elias repeated. "Yeah, like air moving where it shouldn't be. We checked the surface, and there was a gap, small at first. But when we cleared some of the brick," he nodded toward the photograph, "that opened up." Clara studied the image again. It did not look like a modern tunnel. It looked older, much older. "What's at the end of it?" she asked. Mark's expression shifted. "That's the other problem." Elias said nothing. Mark continued. "I walked down it, not far, maybe 20 feet. The walls changed the further I went. Less brick, more stone, like it wasn't part of the railway at all. And there's a door." Clara felt the same quiet chill she had felt the night before. "What kind of door?" she asked. "Wood. Old. Iron hinges. Looked like it had been there a long time." Elias leaned back slightly in his chair. Did you open it? Mark shook his head quickly. No, I heard something. What sort of something? Mark hesitated. Voices. Silence filled the room. Clara spoke first. From the other side? Yeah. How many? I don't know. More than one. Couldn't make out words, just talking. Elias's gaze did not waver. And when you returned with others? Mark let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. It was gone. Clara blinked. Gone. The corridor, the opening, all of it. Just a wall again. Solid. Like it had never been there. Elias folded his hands. And the photograph. I took it before I went back up, Mark said. Didn't think anything of it at the time, but when the others saw it, they said it couldn't be real. Clara looked at Elias. He was already thinking ahead. You've brought this to us because you believe what you saw still exists. Mark met his gaze. I know it does. They descended into the underground that evening. The station Mark led them to had been closed for years. Dust lay thick along the edges of the platform, and the lights that still functioned cast a dull, flickering glow across the tiled walls. Clara stayed close as they moved along the track access path. The air was colder here, heavier. This way, Mark said, guiding them toward a section of wall near the far end of the platform. Clara recognized it immediately from the photograph. Or rather, she recognized where it should have been. The wall was solid, unbroken, exactly as Mark had said. Elias stepped forward, studying the brickwork. His fingers traced the mortar lines slowly, deliberately. Nothing, Clara said. Not yet, Elias replied. Mark crossed his arms. I told you it was here. I do not doubt you, Elias said. Clara turned, scanning the empty platform. Then where is it? No one answered. For a long moment there was only the low hum of distant city movement far above them. Then Clara felt it, but not a sound, not a sight, a shift, subtle but undeniable, like the air had changed pressure. She turned back toward the wall. Elias! He had already noticed. A faint line had appeared between the bricks, thin, uneven, impossible. Mark stepped back. That wasn't there before. The line widened slowly. Brick gave way to shadow, and then the corridor returned. Narrow, dark, waiting. Clara felt her pulse quicken. It's real. Elias did not move. Not yet. He studied the opening with the same careful attention he had given the restaurant the night before. Only briefly, he said. Mark swallowed. That's it. That's exactly what I saw. Clara looked into the darkness beyond the corridor. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous in an immediate sense, but old. Older than the tunnels around it. Older than the city above. Do we go in? She asked. Elias's answer came after a pause. Yes. And together they stepped forward. They entered single file. Mark first, then Clara, then Elias. The air changed the moment they crossed the threshold. Behind them, the familiar scent of dust and metal from the underground faded. Ahead, the corridor carried something colder, older, like stone that had not felt open air in centuries. Clara glanced back once. The platform was still there, but it already felt distant. Keep moving, Elias said quietly. Their footsteps echoed differently here, not the hollow metallic reverberation of railway tunnels, but something deeper, muted, absorbed by thick stone. The walls began as brick. Then, just as Mark had described, they changed. Rough-cut stone replaced the uniform structure of the railway. The mortar was uneven, ancient. Small iron hooks lined parts of the wall, empty now but clearly once used to hold lanterns. Clara ran her fingers lightly along one of them as she passed. Cold. Not just in temperature. Cold in a way that felt untouched. How old is this? She whispered. Elias didn't answer immediately. Older than the underground, he said at last. possibly older than much of the city above it. Mark let out a low breath. So this was always here? Perhaps, Elias said. Or perhaps it is only here now. Clara didn't like that answer. The corridor stretched longer than it should have. She knew that instinctively. Even without measuring distance, something about the space felt extended, like it existed slightly beyond the physical limits of the structure they had entered from. Then she saw it. The door. It stood at the far end of the passage, exactly as Mark had described. Wooden, dark with age, bound by iron hinges that had long since dulled to a deep, matte black. Symbols had been carved into its surface, faint, worn by time but still visible if you looked closely enough. Ilya slowed as they approached it. Clara could feel the tension shift again, different from before, focused. "What are those?" she asked. Elias stepped closer, studying the carvings. "Warding marks," he said. "For what?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, hovering his hand just short of the surface without touching it. "These are not decorative," he said quietly. "They are intentional." Mark shifted uneasily behind them. Intentional for what? Elias finally placed his hand against the wood. For keeping something contained. Silence pressed in around them. Clara felt it in her chest. "Contained," she repeated. "Yes." She looked at the door again. It didn't look threatening, just old, forgotten. But now she couldn't shake the feeling that it was not meant to be opened. "Those voices you heard," Elias said without turning. "Were they close?" Mark swallowed. "Close enough." Clara stepped nearer, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint. So faint she almost thought she imagined it. A murmur, low, indistinct, like multiple voices speaking just beyond comprehension. Her breath caught. "You hear that?" Elias nodded once. The sound did not come from the corridor. It came from behind the door. Clara took a small step back. "That's not an echo." "No," Elias said. The murmuring shifted slightly, rising and falling in tone. Still impossible to make out words, but undeniably present. Alive. Clara felt the same strange pull she had felt outside the restaurant. Not comfort this time, but curiosity. A dangerous kind. "What if it's like the restaurant?" she said. "Another moment. Another." "Not all moments should be revisited," Elias interrupted. His voice was calm, but final. Mark rubbed his arms. "We shouldn't be here." Elias remained still for a moment longer, hand resting lightly against the door. Then the corridor shuddered. Not violently, just enough to feel. The murmuring stopped, instantly. Silence replaced it. Deep, total. Clara's heart began to pound. "Elias!" He stepped back from the door. "Time is shifting." "What does that mean?" "It means we are no longer aligned with whatever allowed this place to appear." As if in response, the air seemed to tighten. The edges of the corridor blurred slightly, not visibly breaking, but thinning, like something being pulled away. "The wall," Mark said suddenly. Clara turned. The entrance they had come through was still there. But it looked farther and narrower. "We need to go," Elias said. No one argued. They moved quickly now, footsteps echoing faster along the stone passage. Clara resisted the urge to look back at the door. The silence behind them felt heavier than the voices had. Halfway down the corridor, the walls flickered, just for a second. Stone, then brick, then stone again. The space was collapsing, or correcting itself. Mark reached the opening first, stepping through into the familiar dim light of the platform. Clara followed immediately. Elias came last, the moment he crossed the threshold. The corridor vanished, gone, replaced by solid brick, seamless, as if it had never existed. For a long time, none of them spoke. The platform hummed faintly around them, ordinary again in a way that felt almost unreal. Mark let out a shaky breath. I'm done, he said. I don't need to see that again. Elias gave a slight nod. That would be wise. Mark looked between them once more, then turned and made his way back toward the station exit without another word. Clara watched him go, then she turned back to the wall. Nothing. No crack. No line. No sign of what they had just seen. What was behind that door? She asked quietly. Elias stood beside her. For a moment he said nothing. Then, I don't know. Clara glanced at him. You don't usually say that. No, he agreed. She folded her arms slightly. You think it's connected? Yes. To the restaurant. And the castle, he added. And anything else we have yet to encounter. Clara looked at the wall again, her voice lowered. It didn't feel like a memory. Elias's expression darkened just slightly. No, he said. It did not. Back at the bookshop, Clara sat at the desk with the journal open in front of her. The lamplight felt warmer than usual. Safer, but her hand hesitated over the page. This one feels different, she said. Elias stood near the shelves, already pulling out older texts. It is. She looked up. Because of the door? Yes. Or because of what's behind it? Elias paused, then turned. Because something was sealed there, he said, and it may not be meant to be found again. Clara slowly lowered her eyes to the page. Then she began to write, Case File 02, the tunnel that should not exist. Her pen moved steadily this time, but her thoughts lingered on one thing. Not the corridor, not the voices, not even the door. But the moment the sound had stopped, as if whatever was behind it had realized. They were listening. When she finished, she added a final line beneath the entry. Some doors are not hidden. They are waiting for the right moment to be seen.